The rain in Seoul didn't just fall, it screamed against the pavement. I adjusted my silk tie, the fabric feeling like a noose against my neck. My men stood in a perfect semicircle around the black sedan, their umbrellas forming a dark canopy that shielded me from the world. We had just finished a meeting that should have ended in blood, but instead ended in a contract. That was the way of the modern world. Even the shadows had to play by the rules of business now. I stepped toward the car, my polished shoes clicking against the wet asphalt. My mind was already on the next move, the next district to take over, the next rival to crush. I didn't have time for distractions. I didn't have time for feelings. Then I heard it. It was a thin, high-pitched sound that cut through the heavy drumming of the rain. It was the sound of a child crying. I paused, my hand on the car door. Ignore it, I told myself. In my line of work, a crying child was usually a trap or a tragedy I didn't want to pay for. I looked toward the mouth of the alleyway. There, sitting behind a stack of waterlogged crates, was a small figure. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He was wearing a yellow raincoat that was far too big for him, the sleeves hanging limp past his tiny hands. His face was a mask of dirt and tears. "Sir, the meeting at the docks is in 20 minutes, my assistant, Jun, whispered. He didn't even look at the child. To him, the boy was just part of the city's debris. I nodded, prepared to slide into the leather interior of my car. I had seen 1,000 broken things in this city. You can't fix a city that enjoys being broken. But as I turned away, the boy's sobbing stopped. The silence was more piercing than the noise. I felt a strange prickle on the back of my neck. I looked back one last time. The boy wasn't looking at the ground anymore. He was looking directly at me. His eyes weren't filled with the fear I usually saw in people. They were filled with a cold, haunting recognition. It was a look that belonged on an old man, not a toddler. I froze. My men shifted uneasily behind me, sensing the change in my energy. I should have left. I should have driven away and forgotten this moment. But my feet moved before my brain could stop them. I walked toward the alley, the rain soaking into my expensive suit. I stopped 5 feet away from him. He didn't flinch. He just watched me. I looked down at the boy, my face a wall of granite. I had spent years perfecting the art of being unreadable. "Where are your parents, kid?" I asked. My voice was deep, a low rumble that usually made grown men tremble. The boy didn't answer right away. He wiped his nose with a dirty sleeve and took a shaky breath. The rain continued to pour, drenching both of us now. I could hear Jun calling my name from the car, his voice tinged with genuine confusion. This wasn't like me. I didn't stop for strays. I didn't show mercy. "Go home," I said, turning to leave. "This isn't a place for someone like you." I took 2 steps back toward my life of luxury and violence. I felt a sense of relief. The moment of weakness was over. I was Min-ho, the man who controlled the docks and the counting houses. I didn't have room in my heart for a shivering kid in a yellow raincoat. "The Red Dragon doesn't sleep in the basement anymore," the boy said. His voice was tiny, barely a whisper, but it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stopped mid-stride. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone years ago, gave a sudden, painful thump. I turned around slowly, my eyes wide. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What did you just say?" I asked. My voice was no longer commanding, it was trembling. The Red Dragon, that wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It was a secret. It was a phrase my father used to say to me 30 years ago in a house that had long since burned to the ground. It was the code we used when we were playing hide-and-seek in our old estate. No one alive knew that phrase. My father was dead. My mother was dead. My brother had vanished into the smoke of that fire when I was 10. The boy stood up. He was so small, yet he seemed to tower over me in that moment. He didn't look like a beggar anymore. He looked like a ghost. "He sleeps in the attic where the stars are painted on the ceiling," the boy continued. He stepped out from the shadows of the crates, the rain washing the dirt from his cheeks. My breath caught in my throat. The attic of our old house had a ceiling painted with the constellations. My father had painted them himself. I felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. The world seemed to tilt. "Who told you that?" I hissed, moving closer and grabbing the boy by his small shoulders. My grip was probably too tight, but I couldn't help it. "Who sent you here to play these games with me? Was it the Soul Syndicate? Is this a joke?" I was looking for a wire, a hidden camera, or a sniper in the distance. This had to be a play by my enemies to get into my head. 3. Boy didn't cry when I grabbed him. He just looked at my hands on his shoulders, then back up at my face. You grew up, Minho, he said, my name. He used my real name, not my title. He didn't call me boss or sir. He spoke to me like an equal or worse, like an elder. My men were out of the car now, their hands on their holsters. They saw my distress and were ready to clear the alley with lead. Stay back, I roared at them. They stopped instantly, looking at each other in total shock. They had never seen me lose my cool. I turned back to the boy. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he was a distant relative. No, I had tracked down every branch of my family tree and found nothing but stumps. Maybe he was a psychic. I didn't believe in that junk. How do you know my name? I whispered, leaning down so my face was level with his. He smelled like ozone and old paper. It was a scent that triggered a memory so deep it made my eyes sting. I remember the fire, the boy said. He reached out a small, cold hand and touched my cheek. I should have pulled away. I should have been disgusted. Instead, I felt a warmth spread from his touch through my entire body. I remember the way you cried when the roof fell in. You thought I was gone. You thought the dragon burned up. I felt like I was drowning. The fire he was talking about happened decades ago. This child wasn't even alive then. He wasn't even a thought in his parents' heads. Yet he was describing the night my life ended and my career as a monster began with perfect, terrifying detail. Is this some kind of trick? I asked, though my voice lacked conviction. Who gave you this information? The boy shook his head slowly. Nobody gave it to me, Minho. I brought it with me. He looked exhausted suddenly, his small frame sagging under the weight of the rain and the words he was speaking. I've been looking for you for a long time. I had to wait to come back. The bridge was long and the water was dark. I didn't understand what he meant by a bridge or dark water, but I knew one thing. I couldn't leave him here. If my enemies found out a child knew my deepest secrets, they would use him to destroy me. And if he was telling the truth, whatever that truth was, he was the only link I had to a past I thought was ash. I picked him up. He was light, almost weightless. I tucked him under my coat, shielding him from the rain. I carried the boy to the car. My men opened the door in silence, their eyes fixed on the ground. They knew better than to ask questions when my face looked like a thunderstorm. I sat in the back seat with the boy next to me. He looked tiny against the expensive black leather. Jun sat in the front, looking in the rearview mirror with a concerned expression. Sir, the docks, he asked tentatively. I looked at the boy. He was shivering now, his eyes fluttering shut. The adrenaline was leaving him, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Forget the docks, I said. Take us to the penthouse, and call Dr. Han. Tell him to meet us there in 10 minutes. If he's a second late, he loses his license. And his hands. Jun nodded quickly and put the car in gear. The engine roared to life and we sped away from the alley. As we drove through the neon-lit streets of Seoul, I watched the boy. He had fallen asleep almost instantly, his head lolling against my arm. I looked at his hands. They were scarred. Not the kind of scars you get from playing on a playground, but old, faint marks that looked like they had been there for a lifetime. My mind was a whirlpool of impossible thoughts. Was it possible? Reincarnation. It was a thing people talked about in temples, something grandmothers whispered about over tea. But in the world of the Mafia, we didn't believe in second chances. We believed in the here and now. We believed in power and gold. Yet this boy had spoken words that only my dead brother could have known. He had used a tone of voice that echoed in the back of my mind from a childhood spent in the sun. I reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from his forehead. Who are you? I whispered to the empty air of the car. The boy stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. I felt a protective instinct rise up in me that I didn't recognize. For years, I had built a fortress around my life. I lived in a penthouse with bulletproof glass. I traveled with a small army. I trusted no one. But here I was, bringing a total stranger into my inner sanctum because of a few words about a red dragon. If the other bosses heard about this, they would think I had gone soft. They would think I was ripe for a coup. I didn't care. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't thinking about territory or money. I was thinking about a ceiling painted with stars. The penthouse was silent when we arrived, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant city sounds below. I carried the boy inside, passing the security detail without a word. I laid him down on the oversized velvet sofa in the living room. Dr. Han was already there, packing nervously. He was a man who owed me his life 3 times over, and he knew the cost of failure. Examine him, I ordered, gesturing to the child. I want to know everything. Is he drugged? Is he sick? Is there anything unusual about him? Dr. Han nodded and moved toward the boy with his medical bag. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. The lights of Seoul twinkled like fallen stars, but I couldn't appreciate the view. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. He's severely malnourished, Minho, Dr. Han said after a few minutes. He was checking the boy's heartbeat with a stethoscope. And he's exhausted, but physically he's just a normal child. No drugs in his system from what I can tell without a blood test. No signs of foul play. I turned around, my brow furrowed. Nothing unusual, I pressed. Dr. Han hesitated. He looked at the boy's chest, then back at me. There is one thing, it's probably nothing, just a birthmark, but... He moved the boy's shirt aside. There, right over his heart, was a small, dark mark. It was shaped like a jagged flame. I felt the air leave my lungs. I walked over and knelt beside the sofa. I pulled back my own sleeve and looked at the underside of my forearm. I had a scar in that exact same shape. I got it the night of the fire when a piece of burning timber fell on me. But my brother had been born with a birthmark that looked exactly like that. My mother used to joke that he was born with a fire in his heart. I touched the mark on the boy's chest with a trembling finger. It wasn't a scar. It was skin. He needs food and rest, Dr. Han said, sensing my intensity. I'll write a prescription for some vitamins, but mostly he just needs to sleep. I nodded, not looking up. Jun, pay the doctor, make sure he forgets he was ever here. Once they were gone, I sat on the floor next to the sofa. I watched the boy's chest rise and fall. The boss was gone. The Mafia king was gone. I was just a boy again, lost in a burning house, looking for the person who made me feel safe. Are you really back? I whispered. The sun began to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, turning the gray Seoul skyline into a wash of gold and orange. I hadn't slept. I sat in the designer armchair across from the sofa, my suit jacket discarded on the floor, watching the boy breathe. Every few minutes, I checked the digital clock on the wall. Time felt like it was warping. I was a man who lived by the second. Logistics, hits, deliveries, bribes. But now, the seconds felt heavy, like lead. I looked at my hands. They were stained with the metaphorical blood of a decade spent climbing to the top of the underworld. Then I looked at his hands. They were small, soft, and currently gripping the edge of a cashmere throw blanket. Around 7:00 a.m., the boy stirred. He didn't wake up screaming or confused like a normal child would in a stranger's fortress. He simply opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. He stayed like that for a long time, watching the shadows retreat. The stars are missing, he said quietly. His voice was raspier this morning, filtered through a dry throat. I stood up, my knees popping from the hours of stillness. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of expensive alkaline water, bringing it to him. He sat up slowly and took it, drinking with a focused intensity. He didn't spill a drop. The way he held the glass, fingers tucked exactly so, sent a fresh shiver down my spine. It was a habit my brother had. He hated getting his fingertips wet. I don't have stars on this ceiling, I said, my voice sounding gravelly even to my own ears. I have security cameras and smoke detectors. The boy handed the glass back to me. You always were too practical, Minho. Father said you'd grow up to be a man of stone if you didn't learn to dream. I nearly dropped the glass. My father had said those exact words to me during a summer hike in Buckhanson when I was 9 years old. I had been complaining about the weight of my pack, focusing only on the trail while my brother stopped to look at every butterfly. Who are you? I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I need a name, a real one, not a ghost's name. The boy looked me dead in the eye. My mother called me Subin, but you called me Little Dragon when we were alone. I felt the air leave the room. Subin, my brother, the one I had watched disappear into a wall of orange flame while I was dragged away by a neighbor. The one whose body was never found, presumed turned to ash. I reached out and gripped the back of the sofa to steady myself. Subin is dead, I hissed. He died 25 years ago. You're just a kid. You're 5, 6. The boy shrugged, a gesture so casual it was haunting. The body is new. The soul is tired. I had to find a way back because you were losing yourself. You've become the monster Father warned us about. He looked around the cold, minimalist room. You live in a cage made of glass, brother, and you're waiting for someone to break it. I stepped back, the word brother echoing in my skull like a gunshot. Don't call me that, I snapped. You don't know what you're talking about. I turned my back on him, packing the length of the marble floor. My mind was trying to build a wall against the impossible. If this was true, the entire foundation of my reality was gone. If the dead could come back, then the lives I had taken, the people I had buried. Did they come back too? Was I surrounded by ghosts I couldn't see? I felt a sudden, irrational burst of anger. It was easier to be angry than to be vulnerable. I spun around, pointing a finger at him. I'm going to find out who sent you. I don't care if you're a genius actor or some kind of freak. No one plays with my head and lives. The boy didn't look scared. He actually looked disappointed. He slid off the sofa, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. He walked toward the window, looking out at the city. You have a scar on your left hip, he said, not turning around. You got it when you tried to climb the iron fence to get the ball I kicked over. You told Mother you tripped on the stairs so I wouldn't get in trouble. I froze. That was a secret between us. Not even our parents had known the truth of that day. I felt the wall in my mind start to crumble, stone by stone. I walked over to him, my shadow looming over his small frame. Why now? I asked, my voice breaking. If you're really him, why come back now like this? Because the man who killed us is still breathing, the boy said. He turned to face me, and for a second I didn't see a child. I saw the eyes of the boy I grew up with, filled with a fire that the rain couldn't put out. He thinks he won. He thinks he burned the legacy of the Kim family and turned the survivor into his puppet. My heart stopped. My rise to power hadn't been accidental. After the fire, I had been taken in by an uncle, a man named Chairman Kang. He had raised me, taught me the business, and placed me at the head of the sole operation. I had always believed the fire was an accident, a faulty wire in an old house. Chairman Kang, I whispered. The boy nodded slowly. He didn't save you, Minho. He harvested you. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I had built, my status, my wealth, my loyalty was rooted in the gratitude I felt toward the man who rescued me from the ashes. If the boy was right, I had spent 2 decades serving the man who murdered my family. I sank to my knees, right there in front of the window. The powerful boss of the underworld was suddenly small. He told me he loved my father, I managed to say. He told me he was honored to raise his friend's son. The boy walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. He loved father's land. He loved father's connections, and he loves having a dog that bites whoever he points at. I looked at the boy, and for the first time I didn't see a threat. I saw a mirror. The weight of the revelation was a physical pressure on my lungs. I sat on the floor, the cold marble seeping through my trousers, looking at this child who claimed to be my past. If Chairman Kang had started the fire, then my entire life was a lie. Every person I had intimidated, every rival I had crushed on his orders, it was all to line the pockets of my family's killer. I looked at my hands again. They weren't just stained, they were owned. I was a tool, a high-end, lethal tool. How do you know it was him? I asked, my voice trembling. You were just a kid, we both were. The boy sat down cross-legged in front of me. I saw him, he said simply. I was hiding in the closet when he came into the study. He didn't see me, but I saw the lighter in his hand. He was smiling, Minho. He looked like he was at a birthday party. I closed my eyes, and the memory of that night came flooding back, but through a different lens. I remembered the smell of gasoline. I had always told myself it was just the smell of the old heater, but now I knew better. I remembered Kang arriving at the scene surprisingly fast, his grief looking a little too rehearsed. He had pulled me into his car and told me the world was a dangerous place, but he would protect me. I felt a roar of fury building in my chest, a heat that rivaled the fire that took my home. I'll kill him, I growled, my teeth baring. I'll tear his empire down brick by brick. I started to stand up, my mind already reaching for my phone to call my most loyal hitmen, but the boy grabbed my hand. Not yet, he said, his grip was surprisingly firm. You can't just walk in there, he has eyes everywhere. Half of your men report to him before they report to you. I looked at him, surprised by his tactical thinking. But then I remembered Subin was always the smart one. He was the one who planned our missions in the backyard. Then what do? I asked. I can't just sit here and pretend everything is fine. The boy smiled, a small, knowing glint in his eyes. We play the game. We use the fact that he thinks you're his loyal dog, and we use me. I shook my head immediately. No, I'm not putting you in danger. If he finds out who you are... The boy laughed, a high, tinkling sound that didn't fit the conversation. He thinks I'm a ghost. Let him keep thinking that. For now, I'm just a child you found in the rain. I realized then that the power dynamic had shifted. I might have the guns and the money, but this child held the truth. He was the architect now. Jun is going to be suspicious, I said, thinking of my assistant. He's loyal to me, but he's also smart. He'll want to know why I'm keeping you. The boy stood up and stretched. Tell him I'm an omen. Tell him I'm a lucky charm. Men in your business are superstitious, Minho. They'll believe anything if it sounds like fate. I looked at him and nodded. It was a solid plan. In the underworld, fate was the only thing people feared more than a bullet. I stood up and straightened my shirt. The boss was coming back, but with a new purpose. Nye. I called Jun into the main room. He entered cautiously, his eyes darting to the boy who was now sitting on the floor playing with a set of silver fountain pens he'd found on my desk. Jun looked like he hadn't slept either. Sir, he said, bowing low, the board is asking about the missed meeting at the docks. There are rumors. I walked over to the bar and poured a glass of neat whiskey, even though it was barely 8:00 a.m. Let them talk, I said, taking a sip. The docks can wait. I have a new priority. I gestured toward the boy. Jun looked at the child, then back at me, his confusion evident. The boy, sir, what should we do with him? I can contact the local shelters or… I cut him off with a sharp look. He stays here, with me. Jun blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Sir, with all due respect, this is a high-security residence. It's not a place for children. If the chairman finds out… I slammed the glass down on the counter. The chairman will know what I tell him. This boy stays under my personal protection. He is an asset. I used the word deliberately. In our world, an asset was something to be guarded and utilized. He has information that is vital to our long-term strategy. Is that understood? Jun bowed again, deeper this time. Of course, sir. My apologies. I will arrange for clothes and whatever else a child requires. I nodded. And Jun, if a single word about this boy leaves this room, I will know. And you know what happens then. Jun paled. My loyalty is to you, boss, always. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. One more thing. I want a full private audit of the 1999 property acquisitions made by Chairman Kang. Specifically the residential districts in the northern sector. I want to know who the original owners were and how much they were paid. Do it quietly. No digital trail. Jun's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't question me. He was a professional. I'll handle it myself, sir. As he left, I felt the first gears of my revenge beginning to turn. I looked back at the boy. He was drawing something on a piece of stationery. I walked over and looked down. He had drawn a dragon, but it wasn't a fairy tale dragon. It was a dragon wrapped around a burning house, its eyes fixed on a man in a suit. He's going to come here, you know, the boy said without looking up. Kang, he'll want to see why his best soldier missed a meeting. He'll want to smell the air and see if there's any treason in it. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The boy was right. Kang was a micromanager of the highest order. He stayed in power because he never ignored a red flag. And me stopping for a child in an alley was a giant, waving crimson banner. Let him come, I said, though my heart was racing. I've spent 20 years lying to myself. I can lie to him for one more day. The boy looked up and smiled. It was a chilling expression on such a young face. Don't just lie, Minho. Give him exactly what he wants to see. A man who has finally found something worth losing. The call came at noon. The caller ID simply read C. I looked at the boy who was now eating a bowl of simple white rice Jun had brought. He nodded at me, a silent signal to answer. I picked up the phone. Chairman, I said, my voice perfectly steady. I was expecting your call. The voice on the other end was smooth, like expensive cognac, but with an underlying edge of steel. Minho, my boy, I heard you had a bit of an episode in the rain yesterday. Missing meetings, taking in strays. That doesn't sound like the man I raised. I forced a small, self-deprecating chuckle. I'm getting sentimental in my old age, Chairman. The kid reminded me of someone. I thought I could use him for a bit of leverage against a local contact. Nothing to worry about. There was a long silence on the line. I could almost hear Kang's brain calculating the odds. Leverage, how curious. Well, I happened to be in the neighborhood. I thought I'd drop by and see this asset for myself. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He hung up before I could object. My hands were shaking. He's coming, I told the boy. Now. The boy stood up and wiped his mouth. Good. Put me in the bedroom. Let him find me there. And Minho, whatever he says, don't look at the scar. If you look at your own arm, he'll know you've made the connection. I stared at him. How do you know so much about how he thinks? The boy walked toward the bedroom, pausing at the door. Because I've been watching him from the other side for a long time. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. He's just louder. I spent the next 10 minutes scrubbing any trace of emotion from my face. I put on a fresh suit, straightened my tie, and poured 2 glasses of the chairman's favorite scotch. When the elevator dinged, I was standing in the center of the room, the picture of composure. The doors opened, and Chairman Kang stepped out, flanked by 2 of his personal guards. He was in his 60s now, his hair a distinguished silver, his smile warm and fatherly. It was the smile that had comforted me at my parents' funeral. Seeing it now made me want to vomit. "Min-ho!" he shouted, walking forward with open arms. He hugged me, and I forced myself not to stiffen. "You look tired. This life is hard, I know. That's why we have to stick together, eh? Family first." He broke the hug and looked around the room. "So, where is this boy? I want to see the child who was important enough to make you stand up the dock workers." I gestured toward the bedroom. "He's resting. He was in bad shape when I found him." Kang walked toward the door, his eyes narrow and curious. I followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs. He pushed the door open. The boy was sitting on the bed, looking small and innocent. He looked up as we entered, his eyes wide and fearful, a perfect performance. Kang walked over and tilted the boy's chin up with his cane. "He does look familiar," Kang mused, his eyes scanning the boy's face. "There's something about the eyes. Tell me, little one, who are your parents?" The boy looked at me, then back at Kang. "I don't remember," he whispered. "I just remember the smoke." The silence in the bedroom was so thick it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. Chairman Kang stood perfectly still, his hand still resting on the silver handle of his cane, his eyes locked on the boy. I watched the side of Kang's face, looking for any twitch, any sign of guilt or recognition. "The smoke," Kang repeated, his voice dropping to a low, melodic hum. "A lot of things end in smoke, little one. It's the natural way of the world. Fire purifies. It clears the land for something new to grow." He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "He's a charming little thing, Min-ho, but he looks half-starved. Why are you keeping him in a bedroom? He should be in a basement or a school, depending on what use you have for him." I stepped forward, putting myself between the chairman and the bed, a move that was instinctively protective. "He's been through a lot," I said, keeping my tone professional. "I'm letting him recover before I start the questioning. I have reason to believe his father was one of the accountants for the Oseung syndicate. If he knows where the ledger is, he's worth more than the docks." It was a lie, but it was a lie Kang would understand. To him, people were only valuable if they held a key to a vault. Kang tapped his cane twice on the hardwood floor. "Accountants? Interesting. I didn't know the Oseung family used children as safety deposit boxes." He leaned in closer to me, the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and tobacco, filling my nose. "Don't get too attached, Min-ho," Kang whispered. "I've seen you looking at him. You have that look in your eyes again, the one you had when I found you in the rain all those years ago. You're looking for a brother where there is only a ghost." My heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Was he testing me? I forced a cold, empty smile. "I'm looking for a ledger, Chairman, nothing more. My brother is Ash, and ghosts don't pay the bills." Kang laughed, a dry, rasping sound, and patted my cheek. "That's my boy, cold as ice. Just the way I taught you." He turned to leave the room, his guards stepping back to make a path. "Keep the boy for a week. If he doesn't give you the ledger by then, get rid of him. We don't have room for useless mouths." As the elevator doors closed behind them, I felt the tension leave my body in a sudden, violent rush. I slumped against the doorframe, my forehead resting on the cool wood. "That was close," I breathed. The boy hadn't moved from the bed. He was still sitting there, looking like a porcelain doll. "He's afraid," the boy said quietly. I looked up. "Afraid?" He looked like he was bored. The boy shook his head. His pulse was racing. I could see it in his neck. "He knows I shouldn't exist, even if he doesn't believe I'm me. He feels the shadow of the past, Min-ho, and he knows shadows are the only thing his money can't buy." I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. The weight of the game we were playing was starting to feel like a mountain. For the next 3 days, the penthouse became a command center. While the world thought I was mourning a failed business deal or nursing a grudge, I was working in the shadows with Jun. We didn't use the house computers. We used burner laptops and encrypted satellite links. Jun was nervous, his hands shaking as he handed me the first batch of physical files he'd recovered from an old warehouse in Incheon. "Sir," he whispered, If the chairman finds out I'm digging into the 1999 acquisitions, he'll have my head on a pike by sunset. I looked at the files, my eyes scanning the blurred signatures and the stamps of long-defunct law firms. He won't find out, I said, because by sunset, he'll be too busy defending his own head. The boy, whom I had started calling Subin in private, sat on the floor nearby, sorting through the papers as if they were coloring books. He pointed to a signature on a deed for a small textile factory. "That's not Father's handwriting," he said. I leaned over. It was my father's name, Kim De-young, but the K was looped differently. It was a forgery, a good one, but a forgery nonetheless. My blood began to boil. They hadn't just burned our house. They had stolen our identity before the matches were even struck. Kang had planned the takeover months in advance. He had positioned himself as the grieving friend so he could inherit the empire that my father had built with sweat and blood. "There's more," Jun said, dropping a second folder on the table. "I found a record of a payment made to a local fire captain 2 days after the incident. A consultation fee of 500 million won. The captain retired a month later and moved to Jeju. He died in a fishing accident last year." The trail was clear. It was a map of murder and bribery that led straight to the chairman's office. I felt a strange sense of clarity. For 20 years, I had lived in a fog of gratitude, believing I was an orphan saved by a saint. Now, the fog had lifted, and I realized I was a prisoner who had been kissing the hand of his jailer. I looked at Subin. He was looking at a photograph of our old house that Jun had found in an archive. "Do you remember the garden?" Subin asked. I looked at the grainy photo. "I remember the swing set," I said, "and the way the lilies smelled in July." Subin smiled, a genuine, childish smile that broke my heart. "We used to hide our toys under the big rock by the pond. I put my favorite marble there the day before the fire, a blue one with a white swirl." I looked at Jun, who was watching us with an expression of pure bewilderment. He didn't know what to make of the child, but he knew I was changing. I wasn't just the boss anymore. I was a man with a ghost at his side and a gun in his hand. "Jun," I said, my voice cold and sharp, "call the captains of the 3 major districts. Tell them we're having a private dinner tonight. No guards, no phones." The dinner took place in a private room of a high-end Galbi restaurant I owned in Gangnam. The walls were soundproofed, and the staff were all men who had been on my payroll since the beginning. The 3 captains, Park, Choi, and Lee, sat around the table, looking at me with a mix of respect and suspicion. They were the muscle of the organization. If I wanted to topple Kang, I needed their silence, if not their help. "You've been quiet lately, Minho," Park said, flipping a piece of meat on the grill. "The chairman says you're distracted by a pet project. A kid." I didn't answer immediately. I took a slow sip of my soju, letting the burn settle in my throat. "The chairman is an old man," I said finally. The table went dead silent. "You didn't call Kang an old man unless you were looking for a grave. He's been leading us for 20 years on a foundation of lies. He told us he built this empire from nothing, but he didn't. He stole it from a better man." I pulled out the forged deed and tossed it onto the table. Choi, the oldest of the 3, picked it up and squinted at it. "This is ancient history, Minho." "What does it matter who owned what in the 90s? We're making more money now than we ever have." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "It matters because if he lied about how he started, he's lying about where we're going. He's planning to sell the northern districts to the Japanese syndicate. He's liquidating us, Choi. He's taking the cash and leaving us to face the police." That got their attention. The only thing a mafia captain fears more than death is being left behind to take the fall for the boss. "You have proof of a sellout?" Lee asked, his hand tightening around his glass. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I knew Kang. He was an exit strategy kind of man. "I have enough to know that we're all expendable to him, but I'm offering you a different path. We keep the districts, we keep the profits, and we cut the head off the snake before it can bite us." The 3 men looked at each other. They were weighing the risks. Kang was a titan, but I was the one who actually ran the streets. I was the one they saw every day. I was the one who paid their bonuses. "And the kid?" Park asked. "The word is he's a lucky charm, a psychic." I laughed, a dark, cynical sound. "He's a witness. He's the only person alive who saw Kang light the match that killed the Kim family. He's the living proof of the chairman's treason against his own blood." I didn't tell them the child was my brother. That was too much, even for them. I let them believe he was a tool I had found to justify a coup. "I'm in," Park said, slamming his hand on the table. "I never liked the way Kang looked down his nose at us anyway." Choi and Lee nodded slowly. The seeds of the rebellion were planted. Now all I had to do was wait for them to grow and hope the chairman didn't have a gardener already working in the dark. When I returned to the penthouse, the air felt different. It was charged like the moments before a lightning strike. Subin was standing by the window, watching the traffic. He didn't turn around when I entered. "They agreed," I said, tossing my keys on the table. "They're greedy and scared. It's the perfect combination for a betrayal." Subin turned around, and I noticed his eyes were red. He had been crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, a sudden spike of panic hitting me. "Did someone come here?" "Did Jun say something?" Subin shook his head and walked over to me, wrapping his small arms around my waist. He felt so fragile, so temporary. "I'm running out of time, Minho," he whispered into my shirt. I pulled back and looked at him. "What are you talking about? You're safe here. I have guards at every door." Subin looked up at me, and his eyes seemed to flicker, the brown irises turning a shade lighter for a fraction of a second. "I wasn't supposed to stay this long. The bridge doesn't stay open forever. I only came back to show you the truth, but the more I stay, the more the world tries to pull me back." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I didn't want to believe in the supernatural, but nothing about this boy was natural. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice fierce. "I just found you. I'm not losing you again, not to a fire and not to whatever this is." He touched my face, his small hand feeling unnaturally cold. "The fire is still burning, brother. It's just burning inside you now. You have to finish it. You have to be the one to blow out the flame." He sounded so old, so weary. It was the voice of a man who had seen the end of the world and found it boring. I picked him up and carried him to the sofa, sitting with him in my lap. I didn't care how it looked. I was the most powerful man in the city, and I was holding a ghost. "Tell me what I have to do," I said. "Tell me how to win." Subin leaned his head against my chest. "He's going to call you to the estate, the old estate where the new house stands. He's going to try to kill you there where it all began. He thinks it's poetic." "Then I'll bring an army," I said. Subin shook his head. "No, if you bring an army, he'll just hide. You have to go alone, or rather, you have to go with me. He's obsessed with me now, Minho. He thinks if he kills the ghost, he can finally sleep." I looked out at the city, the lights blurring into a smear of neon. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. Kang was luring me to his home ground to execute me and the child. But Subin was right. This had to end where it started. It had to be a reckoning. "Okay," I whispered, holding him tighter. "We go together, but I'm bringing a gift for him, a gift that's been 25 years in the making." The call came the following morning, just as Subin had predicted. It wasn't the chairman. It was his head of security, a man named Jayu who had the personality of a wet brick. "The chairman wants you at the estate for a private dinner at 8:00 p.m. tonight. He says it's time to finalize the ledger business. Bring the boy. It's a family affair." I looked at the phone, then at Jun, who was standing across the room. Jun looked terrified. He knew what a private dinner at the estate meant. It meant a one-way trip. "Tell him we'll be there," I said. I hung up and looked at Jun. "Is the package ready?" Jun nodded, pulling a small black briefcase from under the desk. "It's a localized thermobaric charge, sir. Small enough to fit in a coat, powerful enough to level a room. It's triggered by a pressure plate or a remote." I took the briefcase. It was heavy, a physical weight that represented my finality. "Jun, if I don't call you by midnight, I want you to take the files I gave you and send them to every major news outlet and the national police. Don't wait. Don't try to save me. Just burn his world down." Jun bowed, his eyes moist. "It's been an honor, boss." I turned to Subin, who was standing by the door, already wearing his yellow raincoat. He looked like the same boy I had found in the alley, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked ready. He looked like he was going home. "Ready, little dragon?" I asked. He nodded, a small, brave smile on his face. "The red dragon is awake, Minho, and he's very, very hungry." We walked out of the penthouse, my men standing at attention as we passed. They knew something was happening, but they didn't know what. I felt a strange sense of peace as I stepped into the elevator. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future because I finally understood the past. We drove through the city in silence, the neon lights of Seoul fading as we headed toward the hills where the wealthy lived in their fortresses. The Kang estate was a monstrosity of modern architecture, built on the very spot where my childhood home had burned. As we pulled through the gates, I felt the phantom heat of the fire on my skin. The game was almost over. The tires of my black sedan crunched over the pristine white gravel of Chairman Kang's driveway. This wasn't just a house. It was a monument to theft. It stood exactly where my father's study had once been, a cold structure of glass and steel built over the bones of my childhood. I felt the briefcase in my hand, its weight a comforting reminder of the end. Subin sat beside me, his small hands folded in his lap. He wasn't fidgeting like a normal child. He looked out the window with a chilling serenity. "The garden is wrong," he whispered. "He planted thorns where the peonies used to be." I looked out and saw the sharp, decorative cacti and jagged rocks. Kang had replaced life with something that could only hurt. Jiu, the head of security, was waiting for us at the massive oak doors. He didn't greet me with the usual bow. He just stared, his hand resting near the holster under his arm. "The chairman is in the solarium," Jiu said, his voice flat. "Leave the briefcase here." I tightened my grip on the handle. "This contains the ledger files from the Oseung family," I lied, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "The chairman wants them delivered personally." "Unless you want to be the one to tell him why they're sitting in the hallway." Jiu hesitated. He knew Kang's temper was a legendary thing. He stepped aside, gesturing for us to enter. "Fine, but the boy stays close to you. If he wanders, he gets a leash." We walked through the echoing halls. Every piece of art, every marble statue felt like it had been bought with my family's blood. We reached the solarium, a massive glass room that looked out over the dark valley. Chairman Kang was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked like a king surveying a conquered territory. "Ah, Minho, and the little ghost," he said, not standing up. "Come in, sit. We have much to discuss before the night is over." I sat in the chair opposite him, placing the briefcase on the small table between us. Subin stood next to me, his eyes fixed on Kang. The air in the room felt thin, like we were at a high altitude. "You've been busy, Minho," Kang said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Auditing old files, meeting with captains in the middle of the night. It's almost as if you're looking for something that isn't yours to find." I didn't flinch. I had spent my life learning to lie to this man. "I was doing my due diligence, Chairman. If I am to lead this organization, I need to understand its history. Every crack in the foundation is a risk." Kang leaned forward, his eyes turning into slits. "And what did you find in the cracks? Did you find the fire? Did you find the truth you've been chasing like a dog after its own tail?" He laughed, and the sound sent a shiver of pure hatred through my veins. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. The mask was off. "I found everything," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "I found the forged deeds. I found the bribes paid to the fire captain. I found the man who burned my life down and then called himself my savior." I leaned over the table, my face inches from his. "I found a monster, Kang, and I've been serving him for 20 years. Kang didn't look shocked. He didn't even look angry. He looked amused, like a teacher watching a student finally solve a difficult math problem. "And what are you going to do about it, Minho? You have no army here. My men are outside that door. Your captains are loyal to the man who pays them, and right now, that is still me." He turned his gaze to Subin. "And this trick. This child, where did you find him? He's a remarkable likeness, I'll grant you that, but ghosts don't win wars, Minho, they just haunt the losers." Subin stepped forward then. He didn't look like a scared child anymore. He looked like an ancient judge. "I'm not a trick, Kangdi," the boy said, using the chairman's full given name. "I'm the debt you forgot to pay. I'm the part of the fire that didn't go out." The boy reached out and touched the edge of the table. "You remember the lighter, don't you? The one with the gold dragon on the side? You dropped it in the hallway. I picked it up. I had it in my pocket when the roof fell." Kang's hand shook just for a second. The liquid in his glass rippled. "Impossible," he whispered. "That house was a furnace, nothing survived." He looked at the boy with a sudden, naked terror. It was the crack I had been waiting for. Superstition is the rot in every criminal's heart. No matter how much blood they spill, they always fear the dark. "He's back for his inheritance, Chairman," I said, my hand moving toward the latch on the briefcase. "And I'm here to make sure the delivery is successful." Kang's face twisted into a mask of fury. "Jiu!" he screamed. Kill them both now." The doors burst open, and 3 guards rushed in, their guns drawn and aimed at my head. I didn't move. I kept my hand on the briefcase. If you fire a single shot, this building becomes a crater, I said calmly. There's a pressure-sensitive thermobaric charge in this case. If my hand leaves the handle without me disarming it, we all go to hell together. The guards froze. They looked at the briefcase, then at me. They were professionals. They knew I wasn't bluffing. No one brings a briefcase to a death trap unless it's packed with something final. You're suicidal, Kang hissed, his face pale. You'd kill yourself for a ghost? I looked at Subin, who was smiling at me. I'm not dying for a ghost, I said. I'm finally living for my brother. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. The guards were sweating, their eyes darting between me and the chairman. Kang was trapped. He had the power to kill me, but not without ending his own life. It was a checkmate he hadn't anticipated. Tell them to put the guns down, I ordered. Now. Kang looked at the briefcase, his chest heaving. Lower them, he rasped. The guards slowly lowered their weapons, though they didn't holster them. I turned my attention back to the man who had stolen my life. You thought you were so clever, Kang. You thought you could shape me into the perfect weapon to protect your stolen empire. But you forgot one thing. Weapons don't have loyalty. They only have a target. Subin walked around the table, heading toward the large glass window. The moon is the same, he said softly. It looks just like it did that night. He turned back to Kang. You told Minho that our father died in his sleep, but he didn't. He woke up, didn't he? He fought you in the study. You still have the scar on your ribs from where he hit you with the letter opener. Kang's eyes went wide. He instinctively touched his side. It was a confirmation louder than any shout. The boy really knew. The impossible was happening right in front of him. Who are you? Kang whispered, his voice cracking. What are you? I'm the memory you tried to burn, Subin said. He looked at me. Minho, it's time. The bridge is closing. The fire needs to be finished. I felt a tear prickle my eye, but I brushed it away. I couldn't afford a moment of weakness. I looked at Kang. I'm giving you a choice, Chairman. You can sign a full confession. I have the papers in my pocket. You sign it, you go to prison for the rest of your miserable life, and I let you live. Or I open this briefcase, and we finish this right here, right now. I don't care which one you pick. Both ends result in you losing everything. Kang looked at the guards, then back at me. He was a cornered rat looking for any exit. If I sign, you let me walk to the police, he asked, his voice shaking. I'll deliver you myself, I said. I want to watch the gates close on you. Kang reached for a pen on the table, his movements slow and jerky. He looked like an old man who had finally realized he was mortal. But as his hand hovered over the paper, I saw a glint in his eye. He wasn't giving up. He was waiting for a distraction. And he found it when the lights in the penthouse suddenly flickered and died, plunging the room into a terrifying, absolute darkness. The darkness was a physical weight. I heard the sound of a chair flipping and the heavy boots of the guards scrambling for position. I kept my hand clamped on the briefcase handle, my heart drumming against my ribs. Subin, I shouted. Stay down. A muzzle flash lit up the room for a microsecond. A deafening roar followed by the sound of glass shattering. Someone was shooting. I dived for the floor, dragging the briefcase with me. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the chaos. Kang's voice was screaming orders, his grandfatherly tone replaced by a screech of pure malice. Kill them! I don't care about the bomb, just kill them. Another shot rang out, hitting the marble pillar next to my head. I pulled my own handgun from my waistband, firing blindly toward where I had last seen the guards. I didn't need to hit them, I just needed to keep them back. I crawled toward where I thought Subin was standing. Subin, answer me! My hand touched something cold, not the boy, but the glass of the window. It was shattered. The wind from the valley was howling into the room, bringing the scent of rain and pine. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my shoulder. A bullet had grazed me. I gritted my teeth, refusing to scream. I had to find him. Then a light appeared. It wasn't a flashlight or a lamp. It was a soft, golden glow emanating from the center of the room. I looked up and saw Subin. He was standing in the middle of the solarium, and the glow was coming from him. His skin seemed to be made of light, and his eyes were burning like two miniature suns. The guards stopped in their tracks, their guns falling to their sides. They were staring at a miracle or a nightmare. The fire doesn't hurt me anymore, Kangdi, Subin's voice echoed, sounding like 1,000 voices speaking at once. But it's going to hurt you. The glow grew brighter, illuminating every corner of the room. I saw Kang huddled behind his desk, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was looking at the boy he had murdered, now standing before him as a vengeful spirit. The guards turned and ran, fleeing the room as if death itself was chasing them. They didn't care about the chairman or the money anymore. Some things are too much for the human soul to process. I stood up, clutching my bleeding shoulder, and walked toward the light. "Sobbing," I whispered. The boy turned to me, his face shifting between the child I knew and the brother I had lost. "It's over, Minho. The debt is collected." The light began to fade, returning the room to the dim gray of the moonlight. Sobbing was standing in front of Chairman Kang's desk. The chairman was slumped in his chair, his eyes wide and fixed on nothing. I walked over and checked his pulse. His heart had stopped. The man who had survived 100 gang wars and thousands of hits had died of pure, frozen terror. He hadn't needed a bullet or a bomb. He just needed to see the truth. I stood there for a long time, looking at the man who had been my father, my mentor, and my enemy. He looked small now, just a pile of expensive clothes and broken dreams. I turned to Sobbing. He was standing by the broken window, his form looking translucent in the moonlight. He looked exhausted, his small shoulders slumped. "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. I knew the rules of the world had only bent for a moment. Sobbing nodded. "The bridge is gone, Minho. I have to go back to the stars on the ceiling." I walked over to him, wanting to reach out and hold him, but I was afraid my hands would pass right through him. "Will I see you again?" I asked, my voice breaking. The boy smiled, and for a second he looked exactly like my brother on the day we went to the beach. "Every time you look at the moon, every time you do something kind instead of something cruel, I'll be there." He stepped back, closer to the edge of the shattered window. "Wait," I cried out. "What do I do now? I'm the head of a criminal empire. I'm a murderer. How do I live after this?" Sobbing looked out at the city of Seoul, the lights still twinkling in the distance. "Build something that doesn't burn, brother. Build a house where no one has to hide in the closet." With a final, gentle wave, he stepped out into the night. I rushed to the window, looking down at the steep drop to the valley below. There was nothing. No body, no yellow raincoat, no trace of a child. Only the wind and the distant sound of sirens. I stood at the window for a long time, the rain starting to fall again, washing the blood from my shoulder. I looked back at the room. The briefcase was still on the floor. The dead chairman was in his chair. The files that would destroy the organization were safe with Jun. My life as a mafia boss was over, but my life as a man was just beginning. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Jun. "It's done," I said. "Call the authorities. Tell them the chairman is dead and there's a confession waiting for them." And Jun. "Tell the captains the business is closed. We're going legit. We're going to build something real." I hung up and looked at the moon. "I'll try, Sobbing," I whispered. "I promise." The sirens arrived like a chorus of metal and light, cutting through the heavy fog of the estate. I didn't run. I sat in the chairman's high-backed leather chair, the same one he had used to rule his kingdom of shadows. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain, but I barely felt it. I was staring at the empty space by the window where Sobbing had vanished. The room smelled of ozone and expensive scotch. Jayu and the remaining guards had disappeared into the night, scattering like roaches when the lights came on. They knew the era of Chairman Kang was over. They knew that a man who dies of fright leaves behind a vacuum that no amount of gunpowder can fill. When the first team of tactical police burst through the doors, they found me sitting calmly, my hands visible on the desk. They shouted orders, their voices echoing off the marble, but I didn't move. I pointed toward the digital recorder I had hidden in my breast pocket, the one that had captured Kang's verbal admission of the forgeries and the fire. "The evidence is there," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "And the chairman is in the chair behind me. He won't be resisting." They tackled me to the floor, the cold stone pressing against my cheek, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't carrying a secret. As they led me out in handcuffs, I passed the hallway where I had first stood as a terrified 10-year-old. The house felt different now. It was just a building. It wasn't a fortress of ghosts anymore. I saw Jun standing by the police perimeter, his face pale under the flashing blue lights. He gave me a single, sharp nod. The files were gone. The news outlets were already receiving the documents that would link half the city's politicians to Kang's payroll. I was going to prison, certainly, but I was taking the entire rotten structure down with me. I looked up at the sky. The rain had stopped, and for a fleeting second, the clouds parted to reveal a single, bright star. "Move it, Kim," the officer growled, shoving me toward the transport van. I stumbled but kept my head high. I wasn't the mafia boss of Seoul anymore. I was a man who had finally cleared his father's name. I climbed into the back of the van, the metal door slamming shut with a finality that felt like a benediction. The darkness of the van was nothing compared to the darkness I had lived in for 2 decades. I leaned my head against the cold wall and closed my eyes. I could still feel the warmth of Subin's hand on my cheek. "Sleep well, little dragon," I whispered to the silence. "The fire is out." The trial of the century, as the tabloids called it, lasted for 8 grueling months. I sat in the defendant's box every day, wearing a cheap suit that felt more honest than the silk ones I used to favor. The prosecution tried to paint me as a calculating monster who turned on his mentor to seize power, but the evidence told a different story. The ledger, the forgeries, and the recorded confession of Chairman Kang turned the tide. More importantly, the Lucky Charm boy was the talk of the nation. I never told the court he was my brother's reincarnation. I simply said he was a witness who had fled the scene. They searched for him for months, but of course, they found nothing. The captains Park, Choi, and Lee did exactly what I expected. They tried to take over the remaining territories, but without the chairman's political protection and my logistical genius, they fell apart. Within weeks, they were turning on each other. One by one, they ended up in the same high-security wing as me. We didn't speak in the yard. There was nothing left to say. They were the remnants of a dying world, clinging to scraps of power while I was focused on the horizon. I spent my time in the prison library, reading books on architecture and urban planning. I had a lot of time to think about the house that doesn't burn. My sentence was surprisingly light. The judge cited my unprecedented cooperation in dismantling the largest criminal syndicate in Korean history. I was given 12 years, with the possibility of parole in 7. To a man who had been dead inside for 20 years, 7 years felt like a weekend. Jun visited me every month. He had managed to stay out of jail by turning state's witness early on. He was holding onto a small portion of my legal assets, kept in a blind trust. "What do you want me to do with the money, sir?" he asked during one visit. I looked at the blueprints I had been drawing on a scrap of paper. "Buy the old estate," I said. "The one Kang built, level it every brick." Jun looked surprised. "Level it, sir, that property is worth billions." I leaned toward the glass partition, my eyes hard. "I don't want the money, Jun, I want the ground. I want to clear the soil. And then I want you to find the best architects in the country. We're going to build a sanctuary, not a mansion, not a fortress. A home for children who have nowhere else to go. A place where the ceilings are painted with stars." Jun's eyes softened, and he scribbled the instructions down. "I'll get started immediately, boss." I smiled, a real smile. "Don't call me boss, Jun, my name is Min-ho." The years in prison passed with a strange, meditative quality. I didn't fight for dominance in the cell block. I became the man who taught the younger inmates how to read and write. I used the remnants of my influence to ensure that the bullies stayed in line, but I did it through words, not fists. I felt lighter with every passing year. The scars on my body faded, and the weight on my soul lifted. I dreamed of the fire often, but the dreams changed. It wasn't a nightmare anymore. It was just a memory of a beginning. I could see Subin in the flames, but he wasn't burning. He was dancing, beckoning me toward a future I hadn't thought possible. On the day of my parole, the gates opened to a world that looked vastly different. Seoul had grown taller, brighter, and noisier. Jun was waiting for me in a modest silver car. He looked older, his hair peppered with gray, but his smile was warm. He didn't say a word as I got into the passenger seat. He just handed me a key. Not a key to a sedan or a penthouse, but an old-fashioned brass key. "It's finished," he said simply. We drove out of the city, heading toward the hills I knew so well. I felt a knot of anxiety in my chest. What if it wasn't right? What if I had failed the memory of the boy in the yellow raincoat? As we pulled up to the gates of the old estate, I gasped. The glass and steel monstrosity of Chairman Kang was gone. In its place stood a beautiful, sprawling building of warm wood and stone. It looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been placed upon it. There were wide gardens filled with lilies and peonies. A small pond shimmered in the afternoon sun, and by the edge of the water, a large, flat rock sat perfectly still. It was the rock from our childhood. "You found it," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Jun nodded. "We dug it up from the foundation. It took 3 cranes, but we saved it." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. Above the main entrance, carved into the wood, were the words, "The Dragon's Rest." It wasn't a school or an orphanage in the traditional sense. It was a haven. As I walked inside, I heard the sound of laughter. Children were running through the halls, their voices high and bright. A young woman in a teacher's uniform greeted me with a bow. "Welcome home, Mr. Kim. The children have been waiting for the man who built the stars." I followed her to the central hall, and when I looked up, I felt the breath leave my body. The ceiling of the grand hall was a masterpiece. It wasn't just painted. It was an immersive mural of the night sky, deep indigos and violets swirling together to form the constellations. Thousands of tiny fiber-optic lights pulsed gently, mimicking the twinkling of real stars. It was the attic of my childhood, expanded to fit 100 souls. I stood in the center of the room, turning in circles, feeling like the 10-year-old boy who used to lie on his back and wonder if he could reach the moon. "It's perfect," I murmured. "It's exactly as he said." A small boy, no more than 5 years old, wandered away from a group of children and walked up to me. He was wearing a small blue sweater and his eyes were wide with curiosity. He looked nothing like Subin. His features were different, his hair was cropped short. But when he looked at me, I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. He didn't speak, but he reached out and touched the scar on my hand, the one I had gotten from the fire. He didn't pull away in fear. He traced the lines of the scar with a tiny finger, then looked up and smiled. "Do you like the stars?" I asked him, kneeling so we were eye to eye. The boy nodded vigorously. "The big dragon lives up there," he said, pointing to the constellation of Draco. "He watches us when we sleep so the bad fire doesn't come." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. I hadn't told anyone about the dragon, not the architects, not the teachers. "Who told you about the dragon?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The boy tilted his head. "The boy in the yellow coat. He comes to the garden sometimes. He says you're his brother." I stayed on my knees for a long time after the boy ran back to his friends. The world felt thin again, the boundary between the living and the dead blurring into a beautiful, shimmering line. I realized then that Subin hadn't just come back to give me revenge. He had come back to give me a purpose. He had used the darkest parts of my life to light a fire that would keep others warm. I looked at my hands. They were no longer the hands of a boss. They were the hands of a gardener. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and walked toward the kitchen to help prepare the evening meal. The sun began to set over the dragon's rest, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. I walked out to the pond and sat on the big rock. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small object I had carried with me since the day I left prison. It was a blue marble with a white swirl. Jun had found it under the rock during the construction, buried deep in the dirt for 25 years. It was cold and smooth against my palm. I held it up to the light, watching the way the white swirl seemed to move like a galaxy trapped in glass. "I did it, Subin," I said to the wind. "The house is built, the stars are up, and the dragon is resting." I felt a sudden warmth on my shoulder, like a small hand resting there for a second. There was no one behind me, but I didn't need to see him to know he was there. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost frightening. The anger that had fueled me for decades was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I wasn't waiting for a bridge to open or a ghost to appear. I was just living. I stood up and tossed the marble into the air, catching it with a laugh. I walked back toward the house, where the lights were beginning to twinkle in the windows. I had 30 children to look after, a staff to manage, and a legacy to protect that had nothing to do with blood or money. As I reached the door, I looked back at the driveway. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of yellow near the gates, a small figure waving before disappearing into the trees. I smiled and waved back. "See you in the stars," I whispered. I stepped inside and closed the door, the sound of the latch clicking shut echoing with the sweetness of home. 26. The first winter at the Dragon's Rest brought a silence that was different from the cold, clinical quiet of my former life. This silence was soft, muffled by the thick blankets of snow that draped over the curved wooden gables of the sanctuary. I stood in the doorway of the grand hall, watching the children build a massive snow dragon in the courtyard. Their laughter rose like steam in the crisp air. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't checking for shadows or listening for the click of a safety being disengaged. I was just a man watching the snow. Jun walked up beside me, handing me a steaming mug of barley tea. He had officially retired from the logistics business and now served as the sanctuary's administrator. He looked younger than he had in years, the stress lines around his eyes smoothed by the simple joys of managing a budget for crayons and winter coats instead of bribes and ammunition. The news is reporting that the last of Kang's offshore accounts have been seized and diverted to the Public Welfare Fund, Jun said, his breath hitching in the cold. The purge is complete, Minho. There's nothing left of that world but the stories. I took a sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. Stories are powerful, Jun. They're the only thing that actually survives the fire. I looked at the children, specifically at the small boy in the blue sweater who had mentioned the yellow coat. He was currently trying to give the snow dragon charcoal eyes. I felt a strange sense of responsibility, not just for their physical safety, but for the narratives they would carry into adulthood. They were the seeds of a new soul, one built on the foundations of truth rather than the skeletons of the past. That night, as the wind howled against the reinforced glass, I walked through the sleeping quarters. I tucked in the smaller children, many of whom had come from backgrounds as fractured as mine. One little girl clutched my hand as I straightened her duvet. "Mr. Kim," she whispered, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Is it true the stars on the ceiling are real?" I looked up at the glowing constellations above us. "They're as real as the dreams you have under them," I told her. I realized then that I wasn't just building a house. I was building a fortress for the imagination. By the second year, the Dragon's Rest had become a symbol of hope that the city couldn't ignore. We were receiving applications from all over the country, not just for children, but for teachers, artists, and counselors who wanted to be part of something that wasn't driven by corporate greed or political maneuvering. I spent my days in the garden, tending to the peonies that Subin had missed. My hands were calloused and stained with earth, a far cry from the manicured fingers that used to sign death warrants. I felt a deep, primitive satisfaction in watching something grow from the dirt. However, the past has a way of trying to claw its way back. One afternoon, a black sedan pulled up to the gates. It wasn't a police car or a delivery van. It was the kind of car I used to own, armored, tinted, and smelling of old money. A man stepped out, a middle-aged executive I recognized from the early days of Kang's reign. He was a man who had managed to stay clean during the trials by selling out everyone else. He walked toward me with a practiced, oily smile that made my skin crawl. "Minho," he said, extending a hand. "You've done a remarkable job here, truly, a PR masterpiece." I didn't take his hand. I kept my trowel in my right hand and a pile of weeds in my left. "This isn't a PR move," I said, my voice as flat as the blade of my tool. "It's a home. Why are you here?" The man chuckled, looking around at the sprawling gardens. "The land, Minho. The northern hills are being rezoned for luxury high-rises. We're offering you 10 times what you paid for this plot. You could build 10 of these places in the valley and still have enough to live like a king again. Why waste your life in the dirt?" I stood up, wiping the soil from my knees. I looked him in the eye, and for a second the old Mafia boss flickered back to life, just enough to make the man take a half-step back toward his car. "You think everything has a price because you've never owned anything that wasn't stolen," I said. "This ground was cleared by fire and paid for with a brother's love. There isn't enough money in the world to buy a single blade of grass from this property. Now get out before I show you exactly how much king is left in me." He didn't argue. He got back in his car and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust that the wind quickly dispersed. The incident with the executive reminded me that while the dragon was resting, the world outside was still filled with predators. I decided to create a trust that would ensure the sanctuary stayed in the hands of the children forever, protected from any future development or hostile takeovers. I spent weeks working with Jun and a team of pro bono lawyers to solidify the legal ceiling that would shield this place long after I was gone. It was my final piece of logistics, and it felt like the most important contract I had ever drafted. During one of our late-night sessions, Jun looked over the documents and sighed. "You're making it impossible for anyone to touch this place, Minho. Even the government would have a hard time seizing it." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "Good. I want it to be like the stars. You can look at them, you can navigate by them, but you can't own them. They belong to whoever is looking up." Jun smiled and stamped the final page. "Subin would be proud. He always said you were the best at making things permanent." That night, I went out to the pond. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky, reflected perfectly in the still water. I sat on the big rock and thought about the journey from the rain-soaked alley to this moment of absolute peace. I realized that the boy in the yellow raincoat hadn't just saved my life. He had saved my humanity. He had reached into the heart of a monster and pulled out a brother. I felt a deep sense of gratitude that transcended language. I was a man who had everything, lost everything, and finally found something that couldn't be taken away. I reached into my pocket and touched the blue marble one last time. I had decided it was time to let it go. I didn't need the physical reminder anymore. The memory was etched into the very stones of the house. I stood up and tossed the marble into the center of the pond. It made a small, musical plink as it broke the surface, the ripples spreading out in perfect circles until they touched the shore. "Rest well, Subin," I whispered. "The house is safe, the kids are safe, and I am finally home." As the years rolled on, my hair turned white and my steps grew slower, but my heart remained light. The Dragon's Rest had grown into a community. Many of the children who had grown up there returned as adults to teach, to garden, or simply to visit the man they called Grandfather Kim. The story of the Korean Mafia boss who turned his back on blood to build a house for ghosts had become a local legend, a modern folk tale that parents told their children to teach them about redemption. I didn't mind the legend. It kept the sanctuary visible and protected. On a warm spring evening, exactly 25 years after I had found the boy in the rain, I sat on the porch in a rocking chair. The air was filled with the scent of blooming peonies and the distant sound of a piano being played in the music room. Jun had passed away peacefully 2 years prior, and I felt his absence like a missing limb, but I knew he was somewhere laughing about the ledger business. I watched the sunset, the sky turning the same shade of orange as the fire I used to fear. But now, it was just a sunset. It was just the end of a beautiful day. I felt a sudden, familiar presence beside me. I didn't turn my head, I didn't need to. I felt the weight of a small hand resting on the arm of my chair. "The stars look good tonight, Minho," a young, clear voice said. I closed my eyes, a smile spreading across my weathered face. "They do, don't they? I think we got the constellations right." The voice chuckled, a sound like tinkling bells. "You got everything right, brother. The house doesn't burn, it shines." I felt a sense of immense completion, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place after a lifetime of searching. I looked down at the arm of the chair. For a second, I saw the sleeve of a yellow raincoat, the fabric bright and clean against the dark wood. Then it faded into the twilight. I wasn't sad. I knew that the bridge was always open now. I wasn't a man waiting for a ghost. I was a man who lived with his ancestors every day. I took a deep breath of the floral air and leaned back. The world was at peace, and for the first time in 80 years, so was I. The red dragon wasn't just resting. He was finally at home. The funeral for Kim Min-ho was the largest the city had seen in decades, though it wasn't attended by politicians or CEOs. It was attended by hundreds of young men and women who had grown up under the stars of the Dragon's Rest. They stood in the gardens, their heads bowed in silent respect for the man who had given them a second chance at childhood. There were no flashy cars or expensive wreaths. Instead, each person brought a single white peony, laying it at the base of the big rock by the pond until the stone was completely covered in white petals. In the grand hall, the lights were dimmed so the fiber-optic stars could shine at their brightest. A young man, the same one who had once been a boy in a blue sweater, stood at the podium. He didn't talk about the mafia or the trials or the money. He talked about the time Grandfather Kim had taught him how to plant a tree and how he had said that every leaf was a story worth telling. "He told us that we weren't defined by where we came from," the young man said, his voice steady. "But by the houses, we build for each other." As the ceremony ended, a sudden, unexpected rain began to fall, a gentle, warm spring rain that washed the dust from the lilies. The mourners looked up, smiling at the timing. It felt like a final blessing, a closing of the circle. At the very back of the crowd, standing near the gates, was a small figure that no one seemed to notice. A child in a yellow raincoat, standing perfectly still in the downpour. He wasn't crying, he was smiling. He watched until the last of the people had entered the house. Then he turned and walked toward the hills. When the sun came out a few minutes later, a vibrant rainbow arched over the sanctuary, its ends appearing to touch the roof of the grand hall. Inside, the children looked up at the ceiling and saw that a new star had appeared in the constellation of Draco, a bright, steady light that hadn't been there before. They pointed it out to their teachers, their eyes wide with wonder. "That's the boss's star," one little girl whispered. And as the night fell and the world turned, the star remained, a permanent fixture in a sky that would never again be filled with smoke.